Here we are live in the church. We are continuing the story, we're ending the story of knowing Jesus in a new way. On the first day of knowing Jesus in a new way, only the women had the courage to go to the tomb, which was empty. Jesus was gone. But somehow, even in his absence, was present to them. And especially to Mary Magdalene, who stood at the tomb weeping when she heard a voice saying, "Woman, why are you weeping?" And she turned, and it was Jesus. And then he was gone. On the second Sunday of Easter, we heard the story of the two people walking down the road from Jerusalem to Emmaus when they were joined by a stranger. The stranger talked with them on the road, opening up the scriptures for them. When they got to Emmaus, the stranger was going to walk on, but they invited him to dinner at the inn. And at dinner, the stranger took bread and broke it and said a prayer and gave it to them. And their eyes were opened. It was Jesus. And then he was gone. On the third Sunday of Easter, we remember the story of how Jesus came into the room where the disciples were hiding behind locked doors. He blessed them, he spoke with them, had a meal, and left, but Thomas was not there. And when the other disciples told Thomas that Jesus had come, he didn't believe it. He said, "Unless I could touch the wounds in his hands, I won't believe." 8 days later, Jesus came back, and this time, he went right to Thomas. Thomas fell to his knees and said, "My Lord and my God." But Jesus said, "You know, Thomas, you believe because you've seen. But more blessed are those who will believe without seeing." On the fourth Sunday of Easter, we remember how the disciples went home to Galilee. They headed to the Sea of Galilee. Many of them had grown up there and learned to fish from their fathers. And so they went fishing. They didn't catch any fish, but somehow it was just nice to be home. As the sun began to rise, they looked on the shore and they saw a figure and smoke rising from a fire. The figure called out to them and said, "Do you have any fish?" And they said, "No." He said, "Throw the nets on the other side of the boat." And they did, and the nets began to fill with fish. It was Jesus. As they came ashore, dragging the nets full of fish behind them, they sat around the fire. They had breakfast. Jesus turned to Peter and said, "Do you love me?" And Peter said, "I do." And Jesus said, "Then feed my sheep." On the fifth Sunday of Easter, we remember the time that the disciples went out to the top of a mountain. Jesus taught them many things, but he also commissioned them. He told them to go everywhere, to talk to all people, and to tell the stories of Jesus, even this story. They now knew that they were no longer followers, but leaders, no longer sheep, but shepherds, that they would never go home again, but they would make a home for others. On the sixth Sunday of Easter, we remember the story of how Jesus was with the disciples in their room when he invited them to follow him out to a hill near Bethany. And suddenly Jesus, after blessing them, went up. They stood there staring into the clouds until a voice said to them, "Why are you looking up?" And they wondered, "Why are we looking up?" They headed back to Jerusalem to talk amongst themselves. Jesus had promised that he would send the Holy Spirit. But what is the Holy Spirit? And when will it come? Finally, it was Pentecost, or Shavuot, which is the name for Pentecost in Hebrew. It was springtime. The grass was beginning to grow green. The crops were ripe in the field. People, Jews from all over the Roman Empire, were in Jerusalem. They were there to celebrate the great holiday of Pentecost, to remember the great 50 days between the Passover and Pentecost, when they celebrate how God gave the people the 10 Commandments, the 10 best ways to live. The streets were full. People were streaming to the temple. But the disciples were in their room, their upper room. Some people say that that's the very place where they had the Last Supper, the very place where they had hidden for fear. They were talking quietly amongst themselves. They were praying. And then suddenly, there was a sound of a mighty rushing wind, and there were little flames of fire dancing around the room. Even their tongues felt like they were on fire. Filled with great joy, they went down the stairs and out into the streets. People thought they were crazy. They thought they were drunk on wine. But even so, people from all over the world heard them speaking in their own language. Then Peter, full of confidence like they had never seen before, stood up and said, "We're not drunk. It's only the morning." But this is what the prophet Joel prophesied, that young people would see visions and old people would dream dreams, and God would pour out the Holy Spirit upon all people. This is what is happening here. Now, some people heard this and walked by and continued to live by their tradition and lived good lives. But others stopped, and that day they were baptized. Not just with water, but also with fire. And that is why the color of Pentecost is red. Now, I wonder if there's anything that you have at home that you might want to put beside this tile, this card, to help you to remember this story today. I don't know what that could be, only you know, but maybe there's something in your home. Or maybe you want to discuss with each other those godly play questions like, what part of this story did you like the best? What part of the story is the most important part? I wonder if there's anything we could take out of today's story and still have all the story we need. Or I wonder where you are in the story, or what in the story is about you. Maybe you want to remember this whole story of knowing Jesus in a new way. The story we've heard through the 6 weeks of Easter and now the 7th week when we celebrate Pentecost. What did you like about this whole story? What do you think was important? As I said, we're live streaming this story, and, well, the service is going to start in about 15 minutes, so please join us at 10:30 as we worship and remember again the story of Pentecost and the color red.